Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to call this meeting to order. Today is Thursday, February 13th, 2025. This is the Assembly Legislative Committee. We are noticed from 12:30 to 1:30 p.m. We will go ahead and do a roll call, and then we'll move on to our agenda.
Mark Littlefield.
Zach Johnson.
Daniel Volin.
Anna Brawley.
Christopher Constant.
Felix Vera.
And do we have any members on the phone? Okay, not yet. Well, we'll call them out if they're here. And then I know we also have our lobbyist on the phone, so we'll have a report from you in a few minutes. First, let's move. Oh, hello. Yeah, we'll have you on the agenda in just a few minutes. So we have a number of updates today. Obviously, there's a lot happening down in Juneau in state policy and of course at the federal level. So we are going to focus in on what affects the municipality. Just give a couple quick updates under unfinished business, and then also do want to make space for folks to bring things up. I guess I would suggest that we hold that to discussion on active legislative bills at the end, but if there's other pressing updates, we can give those as well. So first, I'll just briefly run through. We have the MOA legislative visit in January. We had a great visit. It was right at the end of the month. Myself, Member Johnson, Member Constant, and our Chair Constant, and I think that was all of us on our side. And sorry.
That was all of us.
Yeah, thank you. And then we had Ms. Ross from Legislative Services and a number of folks from the mayor's office. So it was a successful visit. And we had a great set of meetings. In addition to individual meetings with a lot of our legislators, we also hosted, and thanks again to our lobbyists, hosted a lunch for some key members of the Anchorage delegation to give a briefing on the Port of Alaska Plan of Finance and the modernization project updates. And then we also hosted a really successful kind of dinner mixer for all of our delegation members. And we're able to connect with those folks before the governor's State of the State address. So really good attendance there. We were calling it the Muni Unity Tour, really just demonstrating that we are all from the municipality working together and focused on our priorities, and we shared our legislative priorities. I think that's really all we have to say about that. The next item, just mentioning our next planned visit is next week. The Alaska Municipal League Winter Conference will be in Juneau, as they always do. And then folks from all over the state fly in for that from local governments. We are also scheduling some legislative visits. It'll be a less intensive round of meetings, I think, but really just checking in, especially about budget priorities and other kind of key priorities that we're following, some of which we'll give updates on in a little bit. So any questions on that? Not seeing any. I should have mentioned too, we also have folks from Legislative Services, the clerk's office, and Mr. Clowder from the mayor's office. I forgot to say that before. So for folks who aren't going, but also want to keep in contact with your legislators, please remember to reach out to them directly. You know, we know we all have relationships with folks in our own districts. So please continue to communicate. And then if there's things you would like to elevate for us to talk about in Juneau, please communicate those through staff or just reach out to Nolan. So with that, just briefly, I'll just note we have our standing items of federal, state policy, and then district and member priorities. Those are really just standing items. If anybody does have anything to share, obviously we know there's a lot happening in both of those spheres that we don't need to belabor here. But I'll just ask briefly if there's any kind of if anyone wants to give updates or bring up a topic in those areas before we move on. Okay. Not seeing any. And again, we can come back to that if there's discussion on active legislative bills, we can couch it in there as well. So I think that's our unfinished business. So new business, we will move on. We'd like to hear from, well, I'll give just generally, we'll hear from our state lobbyists. They'll give us a good update on what's happening in Juneau. We do have a couple of specific draft resolutions to look at. One of them, I think we forgot to update the agenda. That was my fault. But we also have one from Member Rivera on House Bill 13. So we'll talk about both of those. And then we'll also come back to other updates. I know we have updates on active election bills, other bills happening, and things like that. So first, let's go to our update from the state lobbyist, and I'll turn to you, Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Member Brawley. Well, things are moving faster than usual here in Juneau. They're really getting it moving along. House is a little bit paralyzed. A couple of their members in chairmanships got what we call rolled or didn't have the votes. And it's now becoming a problem for them with 21 because they can't have one member missing. And so, you know, with family members having issues, there was recently a death. One of the members was sick. And, you know, you just end up with, it's impossible to have 21 around all the time. So the House is struggling a bit, but I think they'll eventually work it out. As far as the budget goes, they're going through it very quickly. So we had our OMB people, we have staff online that do nothing but the budget. And I think our graph sheet sort of shows where they're at. Both sides, particularly the Senate, has said we will not tap the CBR. We absolutely will not do it. There's $3 million in the CBR, $3 billion in the CBR. Analysts say for safety reasons, because of wildfires, because of disasters, we should have a 2.5 billion in there just for emergency purposes, and we're at 3 billion. So touching it will be very difficult. So if you look at where they're at now, and the revenue they have, here's what they can do based on the dividend if you work backwards. If the operating budget is status quo, and that is some little bit of ads, very, very few, and some of them were one-time only funding in there, so take that out. So let's just say it's status quo, pretty much the same amount, right, around 5 billion. The budget allows for 182 million to go into the BSA. To keep it at the same level of funding school districts received this year was 175 million. So all we would do if they added the 182 million is basically be at this year's level funding. And unless they pass legislation, it'll be a one-time only fund again. To balance the budget, the PFD could not be more than $1,000 and a minimal capital budget with federal match. They can go higher than that if they want to, but their only option is to tap the CBR or provide some revenues. The revenues being considered is a tax on the S Corp, which would be Hillcorp, or a per barrel, take away the $3 per barrel tax credit for oil companies, or most of them are focused on oil. The governor had mentioned a sales tax, but he hasn't put it forward, so I doubt that's coming forward here. So what you're facing is we've finally reached the difficult decision time. The difficult decision is they're at $1,000 PFD. They're at stable funding for education being the same as now, which we all realize that's not what the school districts need, and then a status quo operating budget. So the tax question is on the table. It'll be a very difficult decision. Dunleavy put out his education package, and as you know, he didn't increase the BSA. He did provide 117 million more for education, but it was all put into the areas, retention bonuses, 450 incentives, and a bunch of areas he wanted it in. I understand negotiations are going well between the two. Commissioner Bishop was over here the other day and several senators, and they say they're close on negotiations with education. So if we can get that 1,000-pound gorilla out of the road, that will be fantastic. Then we can start to look at the numbers. Last thing I'll bring up, I know Anna, Assemblymember Browley has an update, so I'll keep it short. Last thing, you saw the announcement from Hillcorp where they're going to buy the Marathon facility down there. They're in negotiations at least to buy it. I will say that the S Corp will 150 million, or it's basically 100 to 150 million. I haven't seen a hard number on it, somewhere in there. That will cause them to blink. And if they blink, will that money come from the slope investments or will it come from the Cook Inlet? We're waiting to hear from them to see what they say. So the solution is there to get us over the gap period where we said we import, we've got a couple of years, we haven't got that NSTAR storage online. What do we do? If this goes through, the at least the issue as far as what we do with import and supply will be taken care of. So that should work itself out in the next couple of weeks. I know that several members are coming down this week, and we have identified bills like Representative Schroggy's voter bill. We've also identified other areas we'll be meeting with to try and get some of our exemptions, like exemption for cooperative property. We have a list of all the muni priorities, both budget and for legislation, so we'll be working on them with the members when they come down. I'll keep it short because I know others would like to speak.
Yeah, thank you, Wendy. And I'll just note as well, I asked the clerk to distribute out the document that she was referring to. Sorry, we didn't get that posted online. It's essentially a summary of the budget in comparison to last year. So folks can look at that. And it really just illustrates what she had said, which is that, we're not in a great position financially with the state right now. So any questions from members? Okay, I'm not seeing any in the room, and there's no one else on the phone right now. So thanks, Wendy. And yeah, we'll see you next week. And you're welcome to stay on, but I know you're busy also. So feel free to disconnect if you need to.
Thank you. And if anyone needs me, just text me. I'm available 24/7.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay. So next, let's move on. So I'm going to propose that we, as I said, we have two resolutions before us. I think one's been submitted, the other one will be submitted, and I'm going to quickly deal with the one from Member Salt. He had intended to be here today, but is actually flying right now, so he wasn't able to call in. But I'll call attention to the draft resolution that he has. It is the resolution urging the Alaska State Legislature to implement property tax escalation limitations similar to Florida's Save Our Homes cap. And so he, in lieu of being able to be here, sent a quick written statement. And so I think, Jen, you said you would be able to read that one. So I think in lieu of having a full discussion about this, I know his intent is to put this on the agenda for February 25th. We don't have to take action here. Obviously, folks can make comments if they'd like to, but otherwise, I'm going to ask Jen to read.
Okay.
Yeah, and then we can get into it. Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair, this is a statement from Member Salt on his resolution. My apologies for not being there, and I appreciate the statement being communicated regarding this AR for property tax escalation limitation. With the release of the property tax appraisal notifications, we all have received inquiries regarding the recent increase in appraisals. My goal in this ask is simple. I would like to encourage our state legislatures to look at other states for potential options that may limit escalation. While this AR references Florida as an example, many other states have enacted such legislation, providing options for municipalities to enact should they believe it is best suited option for their citizens. I hope you will join me in approving this AR and ultimately passing it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Mr. Constant.
Yeah, so I recently received a communication from a constituent, and have actually from time to time have the same request, and that is that we should contemplate a rent cap in the municipality. That we should set restrictions on rental income for property owners so that we can ensure low-income people can continue to rent properties in this town. I tend to push back on those ideas, let the market do what it does. But if we're going to do essentially rent control for landowners in our municipality and request a state law that authorizes somehow to put a cap on our own property tax caps, which is an interesting thing, then we should also be engaging in the conversation about rent control.
Thanks. Mr. Johnson.
I'm just kind of thinking about perhaps timing with this without weighing in on the merits of it. I don't think anyone in Juneau is currently working on a bill that would sort of achieve this, right? I mean, is anyone aware of anything that's currently in the hopper? So I don't know if somebody who perhaps is more familiar with the process, but what would the likelihood be, even if we pass this and even if somebody found it appealing, that we would see something that would be introduced, potentially for action this session? It seems like we're perhaps a little late if we're expecting anything to happen with it this year. Or is that, am I perhaps wrong? And then somebody might actually try and make something, do something with this.
Go ahead, Ms. Clausen.
I'll just point out that at the end, the sections where the assembly resolves, I believe it's more calling on the state to do a thorough analysis of how this would work and look to other states. So I'm not sure of Member Salt's intent, but it may be just that instead of passing something in this session.
Okay, good point. Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah, and I would add too, I think, I know there's a deadline that they have for introducing what's called personal legislation, so not a committee bill. But also it is a 2-year session. And so in theory, somebody can introduce something and then it, has action next year. I'm not advocating for or against that. But I think it is a good point in terms of kind of what's feasible. I guess the other thing I'll just note, and I shared this with Member Solt when we talked about this, there's other states. Well, I know this is definitely a big topic of discussion in other states as the cost of housing rises, that there's a direct correlation between the price of your house or the value of your house and the taxes you pay because of the way the mill rates work. Obviously, market value is different than assessed value, but they're related. So other states such as California years ago passed something like this. And essentially the result has been if you've owned your home for 30 years, you're paying whatever the taxes are based on these limitations. And then if you buy the house next to them, say it's the same house, it's just the property next door, you could be paying many times that amount of tax. And so there's really been these interesting kind of large scale systemic real estate market problems with doing that, but that is California's. I don't know if and how Florida's is different. And I think Member Solt said to look at different options. He just picked one from Florida. I guess I don't know, Mr. Clauda, if I know this is maybe new to you as well, if you have thoughts on this initially, or if the mayor's office has looked into this at all.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I have not looked into this specifically. This is a fairly new one for me, but I am familiar with some of these kinds of measures in other places. I think one comment I could make is if you even if you sort of set aside the desirability of the kind of policy content of limiting increases in the amount of taxes, property taxes people are paying, it's worth thinking about the idea of having a state law that restricts how local governments tax, and whether that's desirable, and whether that would be a significant curtailing of municipal powers, taking powers away from us at the state level. So that's one comment I would have.
Okay, any other comments on this? Mr. Johnson.
I guess just, I think Mr. Clauda makes an interesting point, but also under current state law, aren't we required that all properties must be taxed to basically the assessed value, right? There's no discretion currently in the system to make a different determination, different structure at the local level, is there?
Through the chair, so I'd have to defer to the municipal assessor, but my understanding though is of state law on this is that you're correct that we have to charge. There are allowable exemptions, but there's mandatory exemptions in state statute, optional exemptions, and outside of those exemptions, there's a mill rate that you set that is the same across all properties.
Yeah, thank you. I guess, and again, I'm not necessarily saying I'm in favor of this, but it sort of seems like under state law, it's not something that could be a local decision. So it seems like there's kind of an odd tension there, right? And sort of saying we don't want the state to dictate, but we also don't have any control over at the local level currently either. So anyways, just something I'm contemplating.
Mr. Conklin.
I think though that as a home rule municipality, we in fact do have the ability to establish our tax rules. What we can't do is establish new exemptions and things of that nature. But I think you would find that we have very broad authority, and our charter in fact drives our tax cap. And so it depends on which section of the state law they would put this in, because depending on what section it's in, it might force us into a position where our charter is no longer compliant with the state. But practically speaking, for now and until future something changes, we have the authority to levy.
Yeah, and I think, so this is my understanding, well, I guess one thing also I'll say is I know the Alaska Municipal League, generally has a policy of local control. And so, they, yeah, and that doesn't mean that their positions are always our positions. Obviously, we have overlapping interests a lot of times. But I know that they would, likely have feelings about this as well. But, so next step, my understanding is, Mr. Soul has submitted this for the 25th, or not yet, just a draft. And I know he intended to listen to this after the fact. So next step is that we may or may not see this on the February 25th agenda. Okay, so then next one, another one related to property taxes and housing is a resolution from members Rivera and Salt. And I am going to turn it over to Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this resolution has been submitted in the on-base system to be put on the regular agenda for the February 25th meeting. This is a resolution in support of HB 13, which is a bill put forward by Representative Andrew Gray. It's dealing with tax relief in a variety of different categories. The current bill talks about three different parts, dealing with long-term rentals, dealing with mobile home parks, and otherwise known as manufactured housing communities, and dealing with affordable rental housing. So it essentially gives tools to municipalities to offer tax relief in those specific categories. It does not mandate jurisdictions to do so. There are, in recent conversations I've had with the sponsor, there are two possible additions that are being considered. The first one dealing with tax relief for first-time home buyers, and then the second one dealing with owner-occupied housing, which in different settings has been a big point of conversation. I'm not including those in here simply because as I understand, the state bill has been updated as such. But I may state that on the record that those are two possible additions the sponsor is considering. The mayor's office did receive a copy to review, and otherwise happy to hear any feedback from folks. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Feedback, Mr. Constant?
So Representative Gray's team is putting forward the proposal of the first-time homebuyer language on my request. And I've received communications from them. They're finalizing the language. So it is a product that's coming forward. So we can speak about it. Hopefully it'll be through the committee or up to the committee at that point. But yeah, so I may, when this is before us, whether or not it's in the state law, have a discussion about adding that.
Other comments? Mr. Cloud, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, one thing I think, within the administration, I think we look, kindly on things that create new tools that we can implement that can help us achieve certain policy ends, especially on housing. A few of us did discuss, and we haven't gotten a full kind of legal opinion on it, but a few of the items that are in HB 13 could probably be achieved under existing statute if we enacted, ordinances locally, under the economic development optional exemption, which has very broad, which gives municipalities, pretty broad discretion to create tax exemption programs if they somehow are tied to increasing economic development, which many things can be, especially related to housing. So sometimes it's worth thinking about the kind of how many of these require state statutory change.
Yeah, thanks. Other comments or questions? Oh, go ahead, Mr. Constant.
I would welcome your team's analysis then of whether or not the first-time homebuyer exemption would qualify under the rubric of economic development. I could come up with a dozen arguments why it would, but I'm not the one that matters in this conversation. You guys are the first step on that. And I would love not to have to get the state to change the state law if we don't have to.
Okay, I don't see other comments. I'll just briefly add as well. I know there was a lot of discussion about this with Rep. Gray before this got introduced. I know he pre-filed it. I think it's something. I guess regardless of what the outcome is, we know that the property taxes and local governments ability or restrictions on, et cetera, all of that is really going to continue to be an active discussion in session. And so I think this is one piece of it. And I think no matter what, it's going to keep coming up. And so, and to that point too, I think Ms. Ross and I have been communicating for a while. We've been working on some kind of materials or just gathering information really about just helping folks understand our property taxes, understanding how they have changed over time, and the direct connection between loss of state funding over time and the increase of property taxes and items like that. So I think just to say, not specific to this resolution or this bill, but also we're really working to be able to kind of have those in the back pocket for really educating folks about the implications of bills, really any legislative action. And so I don't know if Ms. Ross, you wanted to make a comment on that, but just to say that's something we've been working on. Okay, yeah, no additional. Oh, do you want to go ahead?
I did get printed copies of that property tax fact sheet that I'll be bringing to the rules meeting if any of you want copies to pass out.
Yeah, thanks. And I think it's in the spirit of, we found from a lot of conversations, people just don't know or they don't understand. And then helping them understand can help, but inform good policy. So, okay, well, it sounds like the next step on this one is it will be on our next agenda. And so folks can look forward to taking action on it then. So let's see. So that was our two specifics. And again, if folks have items that they would like to bring forward for discussion, whether it's a drafted resolution or not, we'll come because I want to make sure we have time. We have the clerk here to talk about election bills, but we also have space for that today. So next we'll move on to discussion of active bills. I'm going to point to this tracking list that we have. You'll see that it's still multiple pages, but the list of things we're actively tracking is shorter. So we will come back to these other ones. We're not going to go through every bill individually, but just to orient people to what's in this document. It is not just the pre-filed bills. We took a look at everything that's out there right now. But first I'm going to turn to specifically House Bill 43 and turn to Ms. Hines, Mr. Constant, and Ms. Ross, if you want to talk about kind of what's happening in a couple hours. Thanks.
I'll kick us off. The first election bill is making its way forward. It took us a little bit by surprise because we're not used to legislation moving this fast. But it has a hearing today in House State Affairs. And so it doesn't specifically deal with a lot of the election issues that we're focused on that would improve elections for Anchorage. But we did want to, we do support election bills, and we thought it could be an opportunity for us to advocate for some amendments to put our items in. So Chair Constant will be testifying to that committee this afternoon, and then I'll hand it over to Ms. Hines to tell details.
Thanks. So the bill with hearing today is 43. It's Member Shragi's bill. And so this one would enact same-day registration for the state. I'm fairly sure it would also mandate same-day registration for municipalities. I think I would like a definition of what local municipal districts mean, but I believe that means municipalities, and it also removes something from Title 29, which is registered to vote in state elections at a residence address within a municipality at least 30 days before the municipal election. So I'm fairly sure that it provides for same-day registration. It provides that the state could provide postage paid envelopes for absentee by mail ballots, and it also removes the thing of value from Title 15, which was a request of the Assembly when Member Peterson was chair of the Ethics and Elections Committee. It would also then allow us to move to providing postage paid envelopes. It would require the state's ballots to be on site polling places 30 days before the election, so it wouldn't really affect us. And then it would extend the state's time to count their ballots from 7 days to 10 days. It would give them 10 days or 3 days, 3 more days to count before. And then it would remove the requirement for witness signatures and date on the state's envelopes, and it would add ballot curing for the state. As we were reviewing this and drafting our request to add the things from our resolution that we had adopted in 22, that's a part of our legislative plan, or what is legislative program, sorry. I pointed out to Claire that some of the stuff in the governor's bill, which is Senate Bill 70, also or does already contemplate some of the things we have requested. That bill takes away the quote unquote intent to return language related to voter registration. If somebody moves away but they say they have the intent to return, then they can stay on our voter rolls. A potentially controversial section of this bill is that it removes automatic voter registration by PFD. But here's where it has some things that we might like, is that currently the mail that they send is to be unforwardable mail. And so if they have moved, it's not getting forwarded to them. And so then then the voter will actually get the mail. And so then mail, if the division has been getting mail that's returned for the 2 years preceding, they have not contacted the division in the 2 years immediately preceding, they have not appeared to vote in the 2 general elections, they have become ineligible to receive a PFD in the previous 2 years, or they have registered for or had gotten a driver's license in the previous 2 years, all of those actions would make them inactive on our voter list. And so the getting a driver's license in another state would sort of be like the prima facie evidence of them moving that we sort of asked for in that original resolution. And then it again removes the 2 years where it's the 2 years immediately preceding, where right now it's 4 years. So that contains some of what we asked for. It removes some very directive language about their voting booths, which makes them have their very old voting booths. It provides for postage paid envelopes, as Froggies does. However, it doesn't change the section that talks about a stamp being a thing of value in elections, so that might need to be a change that he needs to add. It changes the timing for absentee voting in state elections from 15 days to 10. Provides that the division may not reject a voter's special needs ballot based on an error made by an election official or the representative. It gets rid of a provision that absentee by mail ballots can be returned up to 10 days after the election day, provided that it's postmarked before election day. At this point, it must be received on or before election day. It would require their ballots to be received on or before election day, which is another interesting change. It would provide absentee voting officials to transmit absentee ballots instead of mailing them to the regional director's office to be processed. So that would speed things up for them. Allows for counting of absentee ballots to be 10 days preceding the election instead of 7, gives them a few more days. No longer allows for including absentee ballots to be received before the completion of a recount. So they count, and then if there's a recount, any absentee ballots that they've received between the initial count and the recount, they count. Takes that away. Allows the director to conduct an election by mail for a community with a population of 750 or less. And removes the requirement for election pamphlets to be mailed. They could just be published on the website. That's a little coverage of the governor's bill.
Okay. Yeah, and so, as I understand it, later today, or I think it was mentioned already, House State Affairs has a hearing on this bill. My understanding is Chair Constance going to testify. And then just as a reminder for folks, elections, safe and secure elections is one of our legislative priorities generally. Obviously, there's a lot of bills out there that we saw that relate to elections in other ways. Either they're explicitly state elections, they have to do with campaigning, or, other aspects of that whole process. And so what we're really focused on is either really things that affect our elections directly, like you mentioned, the thing of value, and potentially being able to provide postage on our vote by mail mail outs, and other things that are just kind of generally, I think, election best practices. And that's really the scope of what the clerk's office is tracking there. So any other comments? on
If
that?
I might, just
Yeah, Mr.
quickly, Mr. Rivera and I went a little bit into the archive just to make sure we understood what the facts were on the question of the stamp as a thing of value. And at one point, the Assembly adopted a resolution in support of asking the legislature to change the law. And then subsequently, there was a proposal to update the plan, and that item was requested and it didn't pass the body, which doesn't mean that the Assembly is against it. What it means essentially is that formally the Assembly has no position on the question of whether or not a stamp is a thing of value. And so for the purposes of our discussion, I'll be clear about that. I support it personally, but that the Assembly has no position on that question. And so we had to go back and forth just to make sure we understood exactly what happened, because memory's funny. I remembered we voted for it. He remembered we voted against it. And in fact, we were both right. And so anyhow, that's how this process works. So I just want folks to know that that area is one area that I will be clear in stating my personal opinion.
Thanks. Any other questions on the election bill? Okay, not seeing any. And yeah, we'll just keep tracking it. And thanks again to the clerk's office and Mr. Constant for stewarding this very important topic forward. Okay, so then let's briefly turn back to this document. So we'll just give a general overview, and thank you to Ms. Vanna Clausen, who's going to be our main bill tracker, at least on the Assembly side, and really keeping us focused. And then you'll see again that this list has the list of bills is larger than last time for the most part, but you'll see that there's a much shorter list of what we're calling actively tracking bills. So these are ones that for the most part, we haven't taken specific positions on bills yet, but these are either squarely in our legislative priorities. A number of them directly speak to things that we adopted in our legislative program, or they are things that potentially impact the municipality, which can include, for example, solid waste services is one of the items on the list, one of our utilities. So that's really the scope of this. So, so some of these have had actual action. You'll see in the status notes where they've been referred to. We are going to keep updating this list. And then I'll also note sorry, so some of these have action, others were introduced and have not been moved forward yet. And then I'll also just generally note, and then we can come back to specifics. The rest of the document is really the other bills list. So these are ones that we have identified at some point. Some of them have to do with education. Some of them have to do with health. Some or police, there's a number of different topics. We ended up taking off just because we didn't want to make a giant list. We ended up taking a number of the education bills off the list that had to do more with curriculum or kind of the way the school operates, because that's within the purview of the district and the school board. However, if folks have strong feelings about one of these, we could always consider a resolution. But otherwise, we really tried to keep this to the nexus of what affects the municipality itself, and not broadly, affects all of our residents, because certainly that's another topic. So, so I don't know if there's any interest in discussion on any of these. We already heard about the couple of elections bills. Just kind of throwing it out there if there's other thoughts or questions. And Mr. Cloud, I'll turn to you too, just not to go through all of these, but if there's ones that you that the mayor's office is particularly tracking or that you're aware of that we should be kind of honing in on at this point.
Yes, Madam Chair, we, this week, I did not actually get a chance to testify, but I was in queue to testify, and the meeting ran out of time for House Finance on the pension bill, HB 78, with, sponsored by Representative Kopp. So that one is one that police and fire are looking at very carefully, and both chiefs have a either, well, the fire chief is going to be testifying. A chief case police department did testify in support of it. And so that one has strong support from the administration.
Yeah, thanks. And then that one I'll note is, so this, generally speaking, you know, if we want to take a position on named legislation, a bill with a number, we can certainly do that by resolution. We have a couple, well, we have one example today, and then another one asking just for general action. But if it is within our legislative priorities and it's clearly in line with that, and so this example of the defined benefit bill, that was one of our top priorities identified. And so, so just to say, you know, we could pass a resolution, but it's a redundant act at this point. So really if you would like to support that action, or if you have feelings about that action, then I would encourage just tracking that bill and participating. And I know, Mr. Johnson, you said you were interested in that as well. So, and that goes for any of these ones that fit within our legislative priorities. Just be careful when you say you're speaking on behalf of the municipality or the assembly. And as Mr. Constant pointed out, there's nuance there always. So, any other questions or comments about any of these? I forgot to note earlier, we were joined just before 1 o'clock by Member Braga on the phone. So Member Braga, I am going to check my text, but just to see if you have any questions or comments that I missed.
All good.
Okay, great. Okay, well, I think maybe Jen, do you want to just share kind of the next steps on what we'll be doing with this document generally? Or the stuff on the document, really?
Yeah, through the chair, you may have noticed the status notes section for all of these bills is not fully up to date. We wanted to bring this list to committee to see if there was any feedback on the actively tracking bills list. If there's things that you want us to track that aren't on there, please let us know. And then same goes with the list of other bills. With the blue heading, we're not going to be actively tracking those. Just want to reiterate that. But if there's things on there that are important to you, please let us know. We'll move them over to actively tracking. The legislature has a system where you can sign up to receive notifications on bills as they're moving through hearing, as they're moving from one chamber to the next. So I specifically will sign up to get those, so we'll be able to know what's happening with the bills that you care about on a probably daily basis until the session is over.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and just to say again, if there are other bills that come up or things that you would like the assembly to take action on by a resolution, that would also mean we update this list. And as we, you know, if and when we do take action, we will communicate that back to the legislature. We've been doing that with any kind of resolutions or things passed with our legislative program and other actions that might be of interest to them. If there was, you know, for example, there's been questions about what's happening with the ACE fund or with childcare. So things like that, that maybe not be assembly action, but we're trying to communicate back and working closely with the mayor's office on that. Okay, well, I think that's really the updates we have. So the last item is really just if folks want to bring up other topics. It does say active legislative bills, but again, if there's things like Member Salt's resolution, for example, asking for action, that would also be in this category. So anybody have anything they'd like to put on the table? Okay. I'm not seeing any, but again, this committee can be a forum for that if you would like to use it in that way. And then I'll just turn one more time to Mr. Clouda if there's any other updates that you may have on things we're tracking, or I mean, maybe not specifics, but just if there's things that we should know in a legislative realm.
Madam Chair, nothing at this point that comes to mind, but I'll keep in touch with you and the committee about anything that develops.
Okay. Well, I think that concludes our agenda. I don't see any other additional comments. I'll just note, we did reschedule one of our meetings. Several of us will be out of state that week of the second week when we had scheduled this meeting normally. So Thursday, March 6th, 11:50 to 12:50 PM will be our next meeting. And then the next one is at the usual time, second Thursday. So with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. We are adjourned.